Finally, months after seeing the car for the first time and a few weeks since I drove a left-hand drive model, we're about to go and test a UK spec version of Alfa Romeo's Tonale. And you might be wondering, why are we driving an Audi Q3 right now? Well, the answer's simple. This is the car it's going to have to beat. So that's right, Alfa Romeo has invited us all the way up to Cumbria, where we're going to be driving that new Tonale out on the beautiful Buttertubs Pass. But of course, not only does it have to beat this Q3 when it comes to functionality and sales, but it's also got to beat it when it comes to character, because this new Tonale, well, it could be the biggest seller Alfa Romeo has produced in years. So it's going to be carrying that brand not only in new markets, but also to new people who have never owned an Alfa Romeo before. Now, the car we've got to represent the Q3 is a 35 TDI model in S-line trim. That means it's got 19-inch alloy wheels, bits of sporty bodywork, and generally it looks quite smart overall. In fact, it's very nice inside as well. It feels pretty premium. In many ways, the Q3 in standard trim is a bit of an open goal for Alfa Romeo when it comes to handling and sportiness, because unless you go for the proper S models or even the RS model, which the vast majority of people don't do in Britain, well, you're not going to get yourself a particularly sporty car. All right, yeah, it doesn't drive badly and it does handle quite nicely, but it feels a bit top heavy. It doesn't feel in any way like it wants to be a sports car. That said, there's really good grip, and the steering system as well is quite reactive. It does feel like they've tuned it more for an urban environment, not surprising. It means it's easy to drive, very easy on the motorway, and it settles down very comfortably. Even the petrol models, which might not be as long-legged as this diesel car, might not have the ratios for efficiency like this machine, everything is really docile and really calm, very comfortable, and very importantly actually, on these 19-inch wheels, which are comparable to the car we're going to drive from Alfa Romeo, it rides nicely, even on passive suspension where you don't get to soften it off into comfort mode. On these winding, twisty roads and the Buttertubs Pass, well, is the Q3 fun to drive? It's certainly grippy, certainly feels content going around bends with a bit of speed, but there's no sense that this thing wants to be sporting, and I think the Alfa Romeo certainly will be confronted with an opportunity to do something differently there. Where the Audi is really, really going to be hard to beat is in its functionality and just the way that the Volkswagen Group, and obviously Audi being at the premium end of that, the way they set out their interiors. You've got a fully digital instrument cluster here and obviously a wide infotainment system in the middle, and they work so well. Really clear, really crisp graphics. The infotainment system is very reactive, very sharp, smartphone-like in its operation. You cannot find fault with it, really. Unless you look at the aesthetics, of course, it's pretty bland, but it works brilliantly. And the same can be said for the rest of the interior. You've got space for everything. The cubby holes in these doors are really deep and really wide. Loads of space down here. You've got USB-C charging ports up front and loads of legroom and space above you, behind you. And that's true whether you're sat in the front or in the back. Isn't that right, Henry? Oh, and the boot of this Q3 is massive. It can swallow all of our camera gear, no problems whatsoever. It's no wonder that this Q3 is so popular with families in Britain. That Alfa Romeo has got a lot to live up to. Let's see how it does. So now we're in the Alfa Romeo Tonale, and if you haven't noticed, the weather's changed quite a lot outside. But do you know what? That's no big deal, because we're on one of the most special roads in the UK, the Buttertubs Pass, and this is proper British weather. And this being a right-hand drive Alfa Romeo, well, it's going to have to deal with this stuff all the time. And I'm happy to report that so far, it feels very content and very comfortable. The rain is so slippery out there, the water on the surface of the road is pooling everywhere, but these tyres, these Pirellis, and this front-wheel drive car is handling it all very, very well. So what are the main differences I've noticed compared to the Q3? Well, as soon as I stepped into the car, it felt entirely different. It's the same class, of course, they are genuine rivals, but you just feel as soon as you sit in this driver's seat, as soon as you put your hands on this smaller wheel, it just feels entirely different, and the intent is clear. This is trying to be the sportier model. That said, you do sit quite high in the car, actually probably I actually think a little bit higher than I was in the Q3 at its lowest setting, but you instantly feel comfortable with your surroundings. The dashboard and everything in this car feels very premium and lovely. I've just got super comfortable with it. Major things to report. The ride, despite what a lot of people have been saying on the internet, the ride is good. We're in a Veloce model, which means it's got the adaptive dampers, it's got adjustable suspension. It means you can soften it off even when you're in the sportier settings. And on these roads here, the Buttertubs Pass, which some of you may know, are pretty bumpy, and there are lots of ruts and cambers, it's doing a really good job. And because we've got the smaller teledial 19-inch wheels, there's a bit more thickness in the tyre than there was in the demonstrator I drove earlier this year. And I think that's paid dividends, because the ride's really good and it's very composed. But even when I have the DNA dial set to D, which is for dynamic, and when the suspension's set into its stiffer mode, it's been doing pretty good. It's definitely fidgety and it's definitely firmer, but it's in no way uncomfortable. And actually, even going over these big cambers and hills, we haven't hit the bump stops of the car, which is very impressive. Some of that, I don't doubt, is down to the fact that this is the only 50-50 split weight distribution car in this class. That means its weight is split front and rear evenly. That's an amazing feat for a car that's basically a small SUV. What really sets this car apart is its steering system. Alfa Romeo has given this car, along with its 50-50 weight distribution, the fastest steering rack of the class, which basically means you need the smallest amount of steering inputs to have a greater amount of impact on your direction of travel. That's the sort of stuff you get in sports cars. I can demonstrate on this really lovely twisty section of tarmac up here just how composed this car is and how much more suited it is than that Q3 to twisty stuff. I've got the damping set in a stiffer mode. You can dial it back even when you're in the sportiest engine setting. And it's so controlled, it corners lovely and flat. And because of that quick steering at the front as well, the car actually feels, dare I say it, pretty agile actually. It's such a shame it's raining so much, because you get the impression that with the car turning in so nice and neutrally, maybe if you could just aggravate it a bit with wider roads, maybe we could just about start to enjoy some slip and slide. But even on a day like today, it's actually really enjoyable to take this thing around bends, so long as you keep that engine on the boil. But what actually I think is probably the car's Achilles heel, when you take into account how nicely it steers, is this mild hybrid engine. Now it's a 160 horsepower, 1.5 litre mild hybrid setup. It gets all the usual stuff, 48 volt electrical architecture, a 7-speed automatic gearbox, but it just doesn't have the oomph, it doesn't have the low down power to really hustle this car along and match the feelings you get while you're going around bends. It's slightly weak. So for those looking for an enjoyable driving experience, you can still have fun in it. You're not going to go particularly quickly, but I think of it more like a slightly older hot hatch where you just have to work them quite hard to get them to rev. And because this Veloce has got these really lovely aluminium shift paddles that are behind the steering wheel, it means you can actually work the engine hard and make sure you're always in the right gear. Honestly, people have questioned the need for shift paddles on a car with just 160 horsepower. And yeah, I know on paper it does seem a bit weird, but I've been using them all day and they really are very enjoyable to use, not least because they sound really cool. When you stick the car into its most efficient mode, which is the A on DNA for advanced dynamics, you can actually notice the engine turn off. So for example, going down hills, the engine will just switch off entirely and you'll just be running on that electric motor, which drives straight through the gearbox, until you start to push the accelerator a little bit harder. I mean, it doesn't give you much range in terms of how far it can actually take you, and especially in how quickly you can travel on electric only. It's very low speed stuff, maneuvering and traffic essentially, or when you're coasting downhill. This is of course a mild hybrid, but that means it's unique because most mild hybrids, they always run with the engine running and the electric motor just assists that. This is unique because it can very occasionally turn that engine off. So yeah, hybrids, power in this car obviously emphasises that it's here mostly to be economical. I think if you do like driving and you find yourself going, I have to have a small SUV, maybe you've got a small family, I think this car does certainly bring some unique features that are probably going to appeal to you. So Alfa Romeo is hoping that the Tonale is the car that's really going to extend its reach in terms of audience. But that also, of course, means it has to be easy to use and it has to be comfortable and good for the family. And actually, with this new infotainment system and digital instrument cluster, both of which are customizable, more so than many of the close rivals, I think those are going to be the big plus points for other buyers. 38 grand or just over 38 grand these cars start from, and then in Veloce trim, like the car we have here is, you're going to be edging over 40k. And everything in the car is well put together, the surfaces are nice, Some of the plastics, yeah, okay, they are plastics, but they're soft and squidgy rather than scratchy. It's just a very nice place, and the seats as well, I have to say, are lovely. So supportive, so comfortable. It's very easy to live with this thing, no doubt, even if you've got a small family. And also, reversing camera, great visibility, big door mirrors, I have to say. Really good visibility. You feel very comfortable driving this thing down narrow lanes, as I am now. So I think it's fair to say we've given our UK spec Tonale the most British introduction ever. I'm currently hiding out from that horrible weather in the Tan Hill pub. But do you know what? I'm really impressed with the car today. Despite this weather being frightful all afternoon, we've had a car that's handled nicely. It's ridden really well on those adaptive dampers, really comfortable, great interior. I think it looks excellent as well. Would I take one over an Audi Q3, which is obviously currently the UK's favourite in this class? I think when it comes to functionality, that Audi still is just ahead. It's just slightly more easy to use functionality of the interior, and of course the boot is a tiny bit larger, but it's only a very small bit larger. And actually that Alfa Romeo feels that much more special, that much more sporting, I think just that much more interesting. And there's plenty of space in the back, it's very comfortable up front. So if your priorities lie more with handling and styling, I think the Q3, well, I think it just falls behind that Alfa Romeo. That being said, the best is definitely yet to come, because with that mild hybrid motor, it's just not quite powerful enough, I think, to enjoy the handling of that car. Perfectly efficient, great in town, but when we have that 275 horsepower plug-in hybrid model, which is due later this year, I think that's when we'll meet the best of the Alfa Romeo Tonale. If you enjoyed this video, of course, don't forget to click the like button and of course subscribe to the channel for more videos like this. All right, hang on, before you switch over, we just managed to jump into the TI, which is the lower grade version of this Tonale. I'm just gonna give you some quick thoughts on this lower spec model. Firstly, I missed the paddles because they felt great and I think they look excellent, but I'm now driving around in an urban environment and yeah, I mean, in all honesty, how many people actually play with the gear paddles on an automatic car these days? Probably not many, so I'll concede that they're probably not necessary. But I do think this ride is a little bit more fidgety. It's definitely comfortable still, but it's a busier ride, definitely. It doesn't soften off and it doesn't feel quite as composed. And the interesting thing is that this is on smaller wheels as well. So we're on 18-inch wheels. So we've got a thicker tyre, but with the passive damping, just a tad bit more fidgety. But as I said, still very comfortable. And overall, it still feels like a Tonale, which is to say a really high quality product. So if you're not looking to spend over the 40k mark to get into a Veloce, well, yeah, you're not going to go wrong with one of these either. Okay, we're actually done now. Two different Alfa Romeo Tonale models, two very good products. Although, if you think that Audi Q3 was more up your street, I should say that that actual car that we drove is available on Cinch. We put a link in the description, you can find it there, along with loads of other Audis as well. See you soon.